the consequences of misleading people in a disaster is a disaster in itself. Yes. And if you are truly a part of the government, then you must act like a part of the government and be responsible in your pronouncement.
Reality is that only 12 million US out of how much? $7 billion is grant funding. Only 12 million US out of over 6 billion of programmed US funding is grant funding. That is the world that we as Jamaicans, both you on that side and us on this side, have to navigate.
And I want it to be clear that I don't need to be threatened. I just want that to be clear.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, this is Smith Reacts, where we break down the biggest stories shaping the Caribbean and Africa. No filters, no fear, just facts. Now listen. Today's video is not entertainment, it's more of a warning. What happened inside Jamaica's parliament will affect the future of the entire Caribbean, and most people are not paying attention. So make sure you watch this to the end, because this is bigger than politics. As you watch, please make sure you hit the subscribe button and like this video. Thank you.
The Minister of Finance and myself, we met with the heads of the institutions to outline the next steps, align implementation pathways, and prepare for rapid disbursement. Madam Speaker, the message from the IFIs, that is the International Financial Institutions, could not have been clearer. They told us directly that Jamaica, already the case study of fiscal responsibility for the world, now has the chance to become the poster child for post-disaster recovery and reconstruction. They commended the government for the decision to establish the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority, NARA, noting that few countries act so quickly to set up a modern, best practice central coordinating body to drive recovery with discipline, transparency, inclusivity, and a long-term vision.
It's really a shame that the international financial community is still approaching the mitigation of the effects of climate-induced disasters on countries like ours by financing packages that are largely based on additional debt. These debts that we are now going to be incurring to finance our attempts at recovery are like lending money to a business that suffered losses through some kind of crisis that is trying to dig itself out of a hole from. Taking on additional debt to do that is going to be a challenging road for any country. Therefore, I don't think it's appropriate to treat these announcements in a triumphant way. We are going to be incurring the costs of paying back this massive additional borrowing in years to come. We are in a country which has spent the last 15 years seeking to get ourselves out of a debt trap, where we've had to run massive primary surpluses every year consistently to reduce our debt to GDP ratio, with a target that's written into our law incidentally by a government from this side, which we were anticipating would have been met this year before Melissa struck us. And now we are facing a new era of massive incremental borrowing. If you look at 3.6 billion US of sovereign debt, that's over 25% of GDP of additional borrowing. That does, and the 662 billion already available, only less than half of that is in a form that's not debt. Most of that is debt as well. This $2.4 billion of private capital, we look forward to seeing whether that will be forthcoming and in what volumes, because you can't project that you're going to receive private investment as part of your recovery. I'm glad that the multilaterals are going to support the effort, but at the end of the day, investors have to be willing and there have to be projects available to them that are bankable and investable. So we will see whether or not that happens. But the reality is that only 12 million US out of how much? $7 billion is grant funding. Only 12 million US out of over 6 billion of programmed US funding is grant funding. That is the world that we as Jamaicans, both you on that side and us on this side, have to navigate. The institution which has been announced to oversee the recovery process, which does not yet exist. It is just an announcement thus far. This National, I think, Resilience and Recovery, or Recovery and Resilience Authority, NARA, is going to, we are told, be responsible for the relief resources being spent in a judicious way, in a way that's efficient, in a way that is accountable and transparent, and in a way that accords with a sensible policy of recovery. After all, the PIOJ has indicated that this financial quarter that we're in now, the economy is going to contract by some 11, I think, to 13% of GDP relative to the same quarter last year. That is a massive contraction. And it's going to further exacerbate the debt to GDP ratio because, of course, the debt to GDP ratio has two components. There's debt and there's GDP. So what we're seeing here is that debt is going to be growing dramatically and GDP is in the process of a free fall as a result of this terrible calamity that has hit us. So while I admire and indeed share optimism about the future, because Jamaica is such a resilient and special country, and we will get through this, I think we should approach an announcement like this with some sobriety. Where this event has caused us to retrace our steps substantially from the economic path we were on, and which the nation incurred substantial sacrifices to get to where we were. I'm not blaming the government for Melissa. That would be absurd. I'm not blaming the government for seeking resources to fund the recovery. It's going to be necessary to get those resources. I am just making the point that this is not something to celebrate. This is not something to gloat about. This represents a substantial setback for Jamaica. And it represents if it's not administered properly, it could permanently weaken our future prospects and damage the country's future. Which is all the more reason why the composition of this recovery authority is important. I wrote to the Prime Minister on the day after the hurricane to suggest the establishment of a task force with broad-based representation, leaders from the private sector and business community, leaders from the churches, leaders from the NGOs, and representatives from the government and the opposition. The concept of NARA is consistent with that. However, I've heard nothing from the Prime Minister as to the role of the opposition in NARA. We heard it will be broad-based, but There is no inclusivity in the dialogue around how it is to be constituted. The likelihood is that we will not be included in it. That is what I'm hearing from the other side in their responses to me, their sotto voce remarks. All I can say is, Prime Minister, the opposition represents some 400,000 voters who voted for us, 28 constituencies, and our presence in the recovery and our participation in the recovery, you'll be well advised to seek in a genuine... So, Prime Minister, the point I was making is, I think you would be well advised to seek in an authentic way the inclusion of the opposition in the governance arrangements over which these funds will be administered on this recovery, because Jamaica is facing an unprecedented disaster, the scale of which is indeed awesome and frightening to those who have to encounter it on a daily basis in several parishes across the land. So, Prime Minister, I wait to hear your thoughts on this. I have asked you about it for a month now. You haven't indicated to me your views, but I'm putting to you today again what I consider to be the optimal approach to dealing with this particular matter.
His concern is that, yes, you may say that $2 billion is available in private sector loan, but are there the matching investments ready to take it up? And investors. And my answer to that is yes. Because the government of Jamaica was already in the process, because of our public investment appraisal process, where we have to develop projects way in advance. In addition to investors who have been coming to the government to say, we want to do this and we will fund it, and we have to be saying, yes, we understand. If you want to partner with us, you have to understand that we have to keep within our fiscal limits. And therefore, there are projects that are lined up waiting for fiscal space to be executed. So, which is why I've been saying that yes, it's a disaster, but it has also created an opportunity for us to fund projects that have been on the track waiting to get fiscal space to be operated. So this is what I mean when I say we have opportunities. So this is also a signal, Madam Speaker, to the private sector that if there are projects that have a national impact that can be done using Jamaica's well-established public-private partnership structure, now is the time to get in line for those projects. The leader of the opposition is saying in a sort of a way that we don't have the money. The point is that once the international community stands up and commits to it, it would be very rare or something dramatic negatively would have happened for us not to have access to the funding. I'm saying the private sector money, they have committed an envelope. And once they have committed that, it is then up to us to meet the envelope. And so I'm confident that we will be able to meet the envelope for the private sector funding. How do we, as a small nation, Madam Speaker, stand on our own 2 feet? The leader of the opposition's argument is that we are going to have to borrow to do this recovery. No, I want to know, hold on, that's what he said. No. The leader of the opposition made the point that we are going to have to borrow to do the recovery. And you have made the exact point. Yes. So what else would we have to do? What else would we have to do? Which shows you the inconsistency of his arguments. But here is the problem now Madam Speaker, how do we borrow? If it were 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we would not be able to approach the IFIs. We wouldn't even be able to approach the international community. But, Madam Speaker, even if we were able to approach the international community, it would not be on concessionary terms. It would not be in a structured way as this. Madam Speaker, every country borrows. The real issue is, what are the terms on which you borrow? And it is the first time in a long time, in over 50 years, that Jamaica is able to approach the international community and be able to get these loans at concessionary and structured rates. Madam Speaker, I can be clear. I can be clear with the House that our preferred approach is to engage with the international financial institutions, because invariably their terms are much better than private markets, and they support technical development, and they engage a structured program. So it is better for Jamaica to engage the financial community in this way. Madam Speaker, we are only able to do this, because we have demonstrated that Jamaica is a good steward with its own resources and a good steward with resources that we have borrowed. That good stewardship, Madam Speaker, the signal of that is that we have been able to consistently reduce our debt to the point where we were almost at 60% of GDP. The international community, looking on at this, says this is a responsible government with which we can partner and lend almost 20 to 30% of its GDP. Now, the question is, as the leader of the opposition points out, we're going to have to borrow all this money. I'm coming to that. We're going to have to borrow all this money, and it is going to increase our debt to GDP ratio. The answer is yes. The debt to GDP ratio will increase. But what are you going to do with the money? If you don't use the money wisely, then you are stuck with high debt. If you use the money wisely, you can expand your GDP and pay back your debt, and you're in a better position. And that is why, so I'm coming now to the question of NARA, of setting up NARA. So, from a week after the disaster, we anticipated this, and we decided that we would have to establish an entity that will be able to use the funds as quickly as they become available. Because a part of the discussion with the IFIs is that the funds have to be made available at a fairly rapid pace. In other words, it couldn't follow the elongated processes. So we had to establish a new entity, and this entity, to answer the question asked by, I believe it was the leader of the opposition or somebody else, the member from South Manchester, what will be the form? What form will the entity take? This is where we are now in terms of studying the various options available for its structure. Should it take an executive agency form? Should it become a statutory entity? What will the legislation look like? These are questions that are now being studied, We sought the advice and assistance of the World Bank in doing the conceptual note. We are out of that phase, and now the Attorney General's chambers and all the other legal experts are now looking at what legal form it will take. I will reserve my comments because I don't want what I say influence the advice that is given. But we want an entity that is nimble, can move very quickly, that complies with our principles of fairness and transparency and so forth. And we want an entity that is forward-looking. The question is, what role will the opposition play in all of this? Now, during the pandemic, I had the awesome responsibility of using executive powers. And I made it a practice that for every executive order that was given, I brought it to Parliament, though it was not required, and it was debated here, and parliamentarians had an opportunity to vary or change. It worked quite well. And I think we could say that we had the cooperation of the opposition in the management, largely, of the pandemic. When the leader of the opposition and myself met, he expressed to me that he would want to have a role in the recovery, and that was not something that I objected to. I still, however, have to figure out how does that work. The framework of our system is we have a parliament. This is the ultimate forum in which we meet and debate. And I have said, hold on, I've said, listen, let us establish a special committee. It wouldn't be under the strictures of all the other rules of how the standing committees and other committees work. It could meet when it wants and have that robust discussion, ask questions, oversight, and you meet. And it's under the rubric of Parliament. I was a bit disappointed that that effort was rejected in favor of going to the PAAC. But I understand, because it is my view as well, that if you have a government and the government has a structure, why go outside of the structure of government? Allow government to work. On the one hand, you can't reject what I have established based upon your advice and request. We have established it. Then you reject it, and then you come here and say you want to have a role. I mean, make up your mind. I am not here trying to hog up everything and do everything by myself. God knows I would prefer that everything were done in a way where everybody carries some of the weight. But let's not try to make political mileage and gain out of a disaster. Let's not do that. No, the establishment of the NARA, as spotted by the member from South Manchester, has to be within a legal framework. And I have to go figure out now how that legal framework can incorporate a member of the opposition or members of the opposition in how that is administered. No. Hold on, member. There is a precedent which I have been thinking about, but I don't know if it has worked. Again, the member from Manchester South would immediately recall that the National Security Council was established in this way, where a member of the opposition from time to time was invited to sit on the National Security Council. Hold on, man. The Disaster Risk Council is an established position And we have always said, let us use that. But you won't want to use the disaster risk council. You want me to go now outside of the established structures and set up another structure. That's what you want me to do. No, I am making my point.
The Prime Minister is again misleading the House. We have never objected to the use of the Disaster Risk Management Act and the Disaster Council, Risk Management Council, Disaster Risk Council, as the framework for dealing with disasters. We have perhaps objected to some of the things that happened during the pandemic in terms of the use of orders to create criminal offenses, but that's a different matter. The framework itself is robust and sound. It has been marginalized and put into OPM, and NARA is being established as a new framework. And all I'm saying is, if you want this to be a national effort, it would be a good idea, in my view, to include the opposition in the governance structure of NARA. If it's a statutory body, all you have to do is in the schedule which establishes its composition, include 1 or 2 members appointed by the leader of the opposition. That is standard, it is done. There are many examples in our law of that, many, including things like the Early Childhood Commission and the Parenting Commission. The Disaster Risk Council itself has the leader of the opposition as a member. And there are many, many others. So there's no rocket science to do this. It's just a question of political will and whether you think it's appropriate or not. And clearly you don't.
So again, the attempted clarification has not made the position of the opposition any clearer to me. When we met, I explained that there is the Disaster Risk Management Act, which already incorporates the leader of the opposition. The leader of the opposition went out and said, we want a different management structure, even before I had announced NARA. No, Madam Speaker, I want to be clear. At the start of my presentation, Madam Speaker, I went to great lengths to explain that the disaster is being managed in 3 different lines of effort. The management of the relief is under ODPEM and the National Disaster Risk Council. The management of recovery is also partially under ODPEM and the National Disaster Risk Council. Some parts of it are privately led, for example, JPS or the telecommunications. They are incorporated. The reconstruction effort, however, by virtue of the time it takes, the funding that has to go to it, is not considered a part of the disaster management, as it were. Because once you go through relief, then you go through recovery, then now you're into reconstruction. And so the reconstruction is a separate phase that has to be managed in a particular way. It has to have not just oversight, but executive functioning. And that's a big difference. Now, before the leader of the opposition attempted to clarify and broke my thoughts, I was about to say that there are some examples of participation of the opposition in advisory functions, not in the executive functions of government. I pointed out the National Security Council for one, the Disaster Risk Council is another, and we could put in place an advisory body, as I had indicated before, of eminent Jamaicans, of members of civil society, and of course members of the opposition, because there will be decisions that have to be made that require strong political and social decisions. So we already factored in our development of how we're going to administer NARA, that there has to be the inclusion of the opposition. And I want it to be clear that I don't need to be threatened. I just want that to be clear. I am not going to accept any threats about if you know. No, that is not the spirit. No, that's what he said. That's what he said. If you are genuine, if you are serious, then let us, as leaders of the country, let us as leaders talk one-on-one without our conversations. I mean, look, let me be clear. Any lies, any misinformation, we have stood by and we have allowed it. That's fine. Now is a disaster. The consequences of misleading people in a disaster is a disaster in itself. Yes. And if you are truly a part of the government, then you must act like a part of the government and be responsible in your pronouncement.
Jamaica has faced severe weather damage, infrastructure loss, communities needing urgent rebuilding. And the government's answer? Borrow more money, through international financial institutions. That's where the clash begins. Mark Golding strikes first. The opposition leader came out swinging. His core argument is simple but powerful. Jamaica has spent decades trying to escape a debt trap, and now we are being pushed back into it. Golding warns that financing recovery through more loans, even after years of painful austerity, is dangerous and unsustainable. He reminds Parliament Jamaicans sacrificed. Social spending was cut, wages were restrained, public services suffered, all to stabilize the economy. So his question is sharp. Why gamble with that progress now? Then Golding zeroes in on something that really rattles the room. The National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority, the NRRA. This new body is supposed to manage disaster recovery. But Golding asks, who controls it? Who oversees the money? Who holds it accountable? And most importantly, why is the opposition excluded from its governance? He argues that disaster recovery should never be partisan. When homes are destroyed and livelihoods lost, this must be a national effort, not a political project. Golding escalates. He suggests that without transparency, funds could be misused, decisions could lack oversight, trust could collapse. And that's why he calls for bipartisan representation, clear reporting, parliamentary scrutiny, and he frames this not as politics, but protection of the people. At this point, the tension is thick. Holness responded calm but defensive. The Prime Minister responded by pushing back hard on the debt trap narrative. Holness argues this is not reckless borrowing. He explains that international financial institutions are offering concessionary loans, low interest, long repayment periods, and favorable terms. To him, this is an opportunity, not a threat. Holness leans on the government's record. Debt to GDP reduced, fiscal discipline maintained, international credibility restored. He tells Parliament This administration has earned the trust of global lenders, and he insists the borrowed funds will be used to rebuild infrastructure, strengthen resilience, expand the gross domestic product, create long-term growth. In other words, borrow now, grow later. Holness addresses the NRRA concerns directly. He says the authority is being designed to be nimble, transparent, forward-looking, and not bogged down by bureaucracy. He admits it's new, but insists safeguards are being built in. And notably, he hints that opposition involvement in an advisory role is being considered. That's a soft concession, but not a full one. Then Holness issues a sharp caution. He warns against fear-mongering, irresponsible public statements, misinformation during disasters. His argument: words matter when people are already afraid. He suggests that political rhetoric can undermine confidence, scare investors, complicate recovery efforts. This moment reveals his leadership style: controlled, institutional, defensive. And here is where this debate becomes bigger than policy. On one side, Golding, confrontational, demanding oversight, skeptical of power. On the other, Holness, technocratic, disciplined, protective of executive authority. One speaks for checks and balances. The one speaks for efficiency and control. Neither is entirely wrong, but Jamaica is caught in the middle. What's really at stake? This isn't just about loans. It's about trust in institutions. Who controls recovery money? Whether unity exists in crisis. When disaster strikes, political infighting weakens nations. And when leaders fail to cooperate, citizens pay the price. Jamaica deserves accountability and action, transparency and speed, unity over ego. Disasters don't ask who you voted for. So, this moment demands something rare in politics: collaboration over confrontation. The real test isn't who won the debate. The real test is, will Jamaicans be safer, stronger, and better protected the next time disaster strikes? That's the question. If you believe this conversation matters, share it. If you care about Jamaica's future, speak up. And if you want more deep dives like this, please make sure you subscribe and stay alert, because what happens next affects us all. Thank you.